we are going to be covering the facility power module of APIMS. And up on the screen sharing is the USAFE IE memo that came out at the beginning of this year. It has the requirements of both using the STAR and the facility power module for tracking maintenance of our tanks as well as our generators. And I have highlighted that it's APIMS system is the system of record for generators, as well as our contractors or tenant organizations. It does not excuse them from not being in the facility power module or using the STAR module. They must be recorded in APIMS. So with that, I'm going to start with tablet specifications. So the facility power module especially, a lot of the efficiencies and joys of using that module is with mobile computing. So the idea is to have a tablet or some sort of laptop in the technician's hands. So as they're out at the generators doing their monthly maintenance, they can real time log into APIMS and record that maintenance. So several installations have already adopted and purchased tablets. We talked with several of them, asking them performance questions, recommendations, and the unanimous recommendation was the GTAC. Where is the number? So 110 is the model number. Air Force back on its standby. Sorry, I'm not seeing the model number anymore. They moved it. But it's a GTAC, and if you use the FG6 Air Force 22 in the search, right now I'm in GSA Advantage, which has a rather steep price tag for said tablet. However, there is the inward-facing purchasing platform, Air Force Advantage, and it's specifically for Air Force purchasing, and it's about half that price for the tablet. Like I said, this tablet model was unanimously the favored tablet as far as the best performance and ease of use. It is a ruggedized tablet. It's rated for a 6-foot fall. So having the technicians out in the field with tablet in hand, accidental drops or falling off the top of the generator, this should be robust enough to handle the fall. And then as far as connectivity, obviously APIMS requires an internet connectivity. And so with the tablets, there's 2 avenues of connecting to the internet. One is through a SIM card, and the other is with a Wi-Fi puck or hotspot. And with that one, the most highly rated way to connect to the internet with the least drop connectivity and the strongest connection was with the Wi-Fi hotspot or the pucks. It seemed like most installations had lower connectivity, and especially when the generators were inside buildings, the SIM cards tended to perform lower than the Wi-Fi hotspot. However, neither of these are the be-all, end-all. Each installation is obviously in a different location, a different region, and performances are going to be different. So when it comes to tablets, when we see APIMS, the only thing you requires is internet connectivity and a CAC reader. So as long as that laptop has a way to connect to the internet and a way to read a CAC, it should be sufficient enough to connect to APIMS and connect then to the facility power module and log maintenance records. We went over this yesterday. I don't think we have anyone new, but APIMS, as I said, is a web-based application. So any computer or laptop that can get onto the internet can go to the URL apims.af.mil. and we'll come to this screen here. For new users, folks that don't have APIMS access, there's the button here at the bottom that says click here if you are a new user. By clicking on that button, there are links then to the SARS form or 2875 to fill out and upload, as well as the instructions on how to fill them out. In the instructions, there are definitions for the various roles in the APIMS database. So APIMS covers not only air quality and engine maintenance, but also has the storage tanks, refrigerants, and water. If you or the technicians already have access to APIMS, any of the modules, and you need to add the facility power module, you don't need to fill out a new SARS form. You can just call the help desk up and let them know who you are, what installation you're at, and that you need the roles for the facility power module. To gain access to the facility power module, there's two distinct roles for that module. One is the engine user, the other is engine admin. The main difference between the user and admin is that they both can enter and manipulate data in the system. The admin has the additional abilities to approve and finalize the 47 or monthly maintenance records. But with that, I'm now going to go over to my training database to walk you through all the different pieces of the facility power module. So in this training database, I'm already in Power Home. If when you log in, your account has you going to a different module or home of the APIMS database, you can click on the Homes dropdown and navigate to Power Home. Looking at Power Home, it looks exactly like the home screen of all the other modules of APIMS. You're viewing the tasks and notifications that have come up for that database. So these tasks and notifications come up, and they're based off of the roles of your account. So if they're just a facility power module, only tasks and notifications pertinent to that module of APIMS will appear. If you have the air manager role as well as facility power, no matter what home you're in, the tasks and notifications will cover all of those modules. The tasks and notifications are hyperlinked. So if you click at the bottom of the tables where it says go to work basket, it will open up the individual tasks with the header being hyperlinked to click on and go into the record that needs to be completed. So for this one, it's the new generator that was started. If we click on that new generator, it will open up the record, and it would if this was production. My training database has a little glitch in it, so that does not want to work. But normally in production, those would take you directly to the record that needed the action required on it for that task or notification. Like the air module of APIMS, navigation through the facility power module is completed through the drop-down ribbon across the top. So I'm going to talk through some of the various pieces and modules along the drop-down menu. The first part of the facility power module I will talk about is the outage log. So on the outage log, it's a very simple high-level report. It's just a way for installations to record when power is lost at the installation, when the power was lost and when regained, what was the cause of the loss of power, and then the number of facilities or buildings that lost power and had a generator supporting it, and then the number of installations or facilities that lost power and did not have a generator. This piece of the facility power module is not a requirement. Some installations, and especially the Power Pro shops themselves, have regularly filled out a report like this in Excel and sent it to AFCAC Tyndall for reporting. So if your shop has historically done a record like this for AFCAC Tyndall. They can start doing it here in the facility power module, where AFCAC Tyndall has the ability to log in and glean this information and no longer requires that data call. However, I'll repeat again, this piece of the facility power module is not required for the utilization metrics. The next part of the facility power module we'll talk about is oil analysis. So under oil analysis, there's the oil analysis log. Again, this is a high level record keeping of doing an oil analysis. So in the Clean Air Act, it requires an oil change on our generators every 500 hours of operation or annually, whichever comes first. When it comes to our generators in the Air Force, that then becomes an annual record keeping requirement or maintenance requirement. We just don't run our generators anywhere near 500 hours in a year, most of them even 500 hours in their lifetime. So we need to change that oil annually. However, in the Clean Air Act, it does have the note that in lieu of doing an oil change, an oil analysis can be conducted to extend the life of the oil by another year. That oil analysis has 3 condemning factors that it must check. So it's the total base number, the viscosity and water content of the oil. And as long as those 3 parameters are within a percent tolerance of brand new oil, it's deemed acceptable or good, and we can extend it by a year. A note about oil analysis, UFC 3-540-07, when in the oil change and oil analysis section of that guidance document, lists a oil analysis kit for the Power Pro technicians to use for this reason. However, it does not meet all the requirements of the Clean Air Act for an acceptable oil analysis result. So even though it's recommended, it does not actually meet the requirements we need for the Clean Air Act. And I keep referring to the Clean Air Act with these requirements, but just note that the OEBGD and FGS adopted all of the language from the Clean Air Act. So while the Clean Air Act is a US EPA regulation, those same rules have moved over and cover installations that are AECOMs. But the oil analysis log, just a simple of adding the analysis result. So from the drop-down list for unit, you would select the unit that you did the analysis on, the date the sample was taken, and then enter the results, whether it was normal or abnormal, pass or fail. You do have the ability to enter comments about the analysis results, as well as upload any reports that you have pertaining to that analysis. By utilizing this oil analysis log, when we get into the 487 on block 12, it's the maintenance of the engine. You can then mark that an oil analysis was done and tie this analysis upload to the 487 so that those compliance records, both the monthly maintenance as well as that oil change, are in lockstep, and we have one complete artifact for compliance. Like the outage log, this oil analysis log is not required for the utilization metrics of the facility power module. However, if you are doing any kind of oil analysis program, it is highly recommended to report and log those results of the oil analysis. That way we have those compliance records. So the next piece of the module we're going to get into is the equipment. So under the equipment drop down, there's 3 different options: inventory, add new, and parts. We're going to go ahead and start with the inventory drop down. So by clicking on the inventory, it's just that. It's going to list all of the engine equipment at your facility that's in the facility power module. So I know a lot of installations, even though the memo said that August 31st was the deadline for compliance with the module, there are still some installations that not all of their generator inventory is in the facility power module. If you're in that situation, there is the option, as we can see from the equipment drop down, to add new and add equipment into the facility power module. However, chances are that that generator and engine equipment record already resides in the APIMS database on the air quality side of APIMS. So we don't want to create a brand new piece of equipment in the facility power module, because that's going to cause a duplicate entry and fracture our record keeping. So if that equipment does reside and exist already in the APIMS database, but just on the air quality side, and not in facility power, please work through your chain of command with AFCAC and get a hold of somebody to help assist you. What needs to happen is a script to move all the information from the air quality side of APIMS into the power module so that the equipment resides in both locations and all the records are intact. But here in this training database, I have 5 generators. So it's pretty easy to scroll up and down and see all 5 of the engines. However, most of our installations have significantly more than just 5 generators. So on this inventory table, if you are looking for a particular piece of equipment, there's these filters across the top. So you can use those to search and hone in on a piece of equipment that you're looking for. Typing any information into any of the fields will dynamically change the table and shrink it down to just the rows that have information matching what we've just entered. You can use any combination, mix and match of any of those filters to hone in and find the particular piece of equipment you're looking for. To transact on the equipment, we have the icons or action buttons on the left-hand side of the table. You do not have to hone in all the way to the one singular piece of equipment to transact on it. I've just shown transacting all the way down to one row just for example. But on the icons, the first icon is the pencil and paper or edit view button. This will allow you to look at all of the static information of the equipment. If you're familiar with 487s, it's the first 4 blocks of the 487. I'll get in that after I go through the rest of the icons to show you all the details and some of the pitfalls of the information that's in there. The next button is the trash can or the delete key. As we are well aware at this point, deleting information out of APIMS is frowned upon. These are historic records. We have record retention plans. Even Power Pro shops understand that they have to maintain records for given time periods. So they have both the 487 and 719 record keeping forms that they must maintain. So we don't want to just delete it out, especially if the case we're getting rid of the equipment or it's going inactive. We don't want to delete. We would change the status, which I'll also show in just a little bit. APIMS and the facility power is robust. However, if you accidentally hit the delete key, it will come up with the question, hey, you're hitting the delete key. Are you sure you want to delete this record? APIMS goes even further that if there are any runtime records, maintenance events, calculations for air emissions against that piece of equipment in the system, even if you hit yes, APIMS will give you the long laundry list of all of those records that it does have and say, well, no, I have all of these runtime records and emissions calculations, I can't be deleted. So I still don't tempt fate, but APIMS and the facility power module is robust. So there's little fear of actually losing the information. The next icon is the eyeball or the logs button. So this is analogous to walking into the Power Pro shop and pulling out the binder or opening the file cabinet and seeing all of the historic 487s. So by clicking on the eyeball, it will have all of the historic 487s that have been entered in the system, or you can get in with the pencil and paper or hit the PDF to get a copy and look through that 487 for that particular month. So if you're being audited or just have a general question about something that happened in a particular month, you can go back and get the record of the maintenance for that engine. The next icon is the plus or I&M status or record. Since the main focus and the daily driver of using the facility power module is creating 487s, there is a button here on the equipment inventory where you can add or begin a 487. As we'll see in a little bit, under the I&M records, the status board, there's going to be a similar icon and the main module for starting 487s. But you can go ahead and start a 487 here in the equipment. The last icon is the PDF icon. By clicking on that, there's 3 different options of documents that can be downloaded as a PDF. So there's a blank 487. So by clicking on that, APIMS will download a 487 for the equipment. So the first 4 blocks with all the static information about the engine, transfer switch, and alternator will be populated. This PDF is also fillable, so the technician can take this record, save it on their desktop, on laptop or computer, and then in the field hand type the information directly into the 487 form and upload back into APIMS, as we'll see in a little bit. For that upload to work with this PDF, it has to remain electronic. You can't download and then print this form off and handwrite and scan it and try and upload it. That will fail. It has to remain in this electronic form saved on the computer for that upload to work. But other reports that can be downloaded and printed off is checklists. So if the storage tank checklist, or if we have any other questions or checklists that we want to associate and have the technicians answer while they're at the generators doing their monthly runs, they have the ability to download and print off those checklists for a hard copy. And then last, they have the ability to copy the 719, which is the life history of the generator. Moving forward with using the facility power module, as the technicians are utilizing the electronic 47s in the power module, the 47 will automatically populate the 719 for them. So no longer do they have to do double record keeping monthly, once in the 47 and then copy the pertinent information into the 719. APIMS will do both record keeping for them. So as I mentioned, we'll hit the pencil and paper and look at the edit view of the piece of equipment, and we should be greeted with a whole bunch of green bars saying that everything for this piece of equipment has been configured and is ready to be transacted upon. So if you notice, there's unit details, engine, alternator, switch. Those are pretty close to matching exactly what is on the 487. So if we click and open up the banners, we can see it has all of the pertinent information for the equipment as far as the engine, make, model, serial, horsepower, and other details and questions for compliance with the Clean Air Act. But I'm going to start with unit identification. So that memo stated that our tenant organizations or contractor maintained generators are not exempt from being in the facility power module and needing their record keeping requirements in the facility power module. So that means we can have multiple entities in the facility power module transacting and entering records and having inventory in the system. So a way to kind of parse that data out and make sure that folks aren't overwhelmed seeing generators that are outside of their maintenance schedule, or the fear and the paranoia of someone's going to mess with my data. The equipment has management groups. So we can assign management groups to the equipment as well as the users. So when the folks then log into the facility power module on the equipment table and the status board, they will be honed in and see only those pieces of equipment that matches their management group. So there's stock management groups in The facility power module, it's Age, HVAC, and Power Pro. With my training database, I've already created some new ones as examples. And after I finish talking through the equipment inventory here, I'll show you how to align users to management groups. But adding management groups is just as simple of selecting from this list, or if you need to add new, I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. For fuel and storage tanks, we can associate both a belly tank or a separate tank to the generator. This then allows the system to know which tanks in the star module are associated with the generator. So if it works out that our engine technicians are also tank custodians for those tanks, we can then associate the checklists for the tanks that feed the generator here in the facility power module. So when they are completing their 487, they will just be the checklists in step with the rest of their 487 maintenance records, and they can do it all in one transaction. So we can associate up to 2 tanks right now in the facility power module and associate it to that generator. Next part I want to point out is under the alternator. So as we've seen throughout APIMS, fields that have the red asterisks following the field name are required in the system. So the fact that all of the banners in this facility power module, all of the fields with the red asterisks have been filled out. In this case, most all of the fields, even if they're not required for this training database, has been populated. However, I want to point out that the phase under the alternator banner is not a required field. However, when completing the 487, in block 17 is the runtime readings, in which the technician is putting in information about the volts and amp readings of the generator. If we have not entered in the phase, obviously we don't know how to calculate, or APIMS doesn't know how to calculate kilowatts, because it doesn't know if we need the square root of 3 or not with the sine waves of the alternating current. So they'll have poor performance of, it won't be calculating out kilowatt or then giving the load of the generator. And the culprit here is the phase. It's easy to overlook because if we don't have the phase filled in, APIMS will still show a green banner on the alternator tab that it is fully configured. So if the technicians ever run into that, this is the culprit right here. As I mentioned on the inventory screen previously, we don't want to delete equipment. We want to intubate or remove it from service. So if the generator is being sent to Dermo, just being mothballed, we want to come in and come to this status banner and change the status of the generator. So to change the status of the generator, right now the table is showing that it's active. It's just as simple of clicking the change current status and then selecting what status is most applicable to the piece of equipment, whether it's being inactivated or removed. This one still has not been corrected in the training database, but it should read out of service. So selecting whichever one is the most applicable to the piece of equipment, and then adding the date that the unit was changing its status. And I can't champion enough adding comments. As you can see, the comments field is not required, but since there's a lot of different folks that use the APIMS database for various reasons, it's always nice to give detailed comments on why the unit went inactive and some of the explanation on that changing of status so that all users have a good, clear understanding of what the situation is for this piece of equipment. I'm going to be a bad technician and I'm just going to say that it's broken. Hit update and it stubs a row in down here. It is possible to continually change the status of a piece of equipment. So in this case, if it were broken and we were just awaiting parts and it took several months, when the new part comes in, we can always come in and say change status and bring it back to an active status. So that's the way to let the APIMS database know that it's either inactive or been removed, but it then lets the system know that maintenance records are not required. Similarly, consumption records aren't required for AEI calculations. The next gray banner is records. So this is the catch-all for question. Are we able to have a not applicable status drop down? So there is a suggestion for adding that if you'd like. Right now, there is no not applicable drop down status. The system is pretty robust and it already knows that portable generators don't need to be in the metrics. I can't speak to the tanks less than 55 gallon. I'm pretty sure it already has that line in there. But if it doesn't, there is, and we can show it right now, in the upper right-hand corner, the silhouette of the person, the suggestions. So you can click on suggestions. The greater user community is always putting in helpful fixes or changes to the database. So you can always search up and see if someone else has suggested that very same thing you want and upvote it. If you do not see someone else suggesting that change that you were looking for, you can go ahead and add it yourself. I'll go in a little more detail about the suggestions later. But great question. So the records, like I say, it's really any kind of documentation that would make it easier or more convenient for the technicians. So one thing that would always be helpful, especially with tablets, is operation and maintenance manuals, O&M manuals, so that when the technician is out in the field doing generator runs, if they need to troubleshoot anything, they can just electronically open that O&M manual and get exactly what they need to fix the problem on the generator. They don't have to worry about coming all the way back to the truck or we're driving back to the shop to get the paper copy of the O&M manuals. It would be directly here in the database. But they can upload their one-line diagrams, the training letter. Oftentimes, if I'm implementing the facility power module, I take photos of the nomenclature plates. So I'll get copies of the engine model and serial number, the alternator and the switch gear to upload, just so we have historic records of those different models and serial numbers. If the engine falls under the new source review of the Clean Air Act, it's required to be certified by the engine manufacturer. I'll get copies of that compliance document or the certification and upload it here. So really anything that makes compliance or maintaining the generator useful can be uploaded here. And since it's just memory is super inexpensive these days, there's no limitations on the number of records that can be uploaded against this piece of equipment. The only limitation is that it's 25 megabytes per file, but APIMS does take any of the most common file types, Word docs, JPEGs, PDFs, and upload as long as they're 25 megs or less. And then the last banner discuss is the inspections. So right now in the inspections, the inspectable equipment is the equipment. So as we go to the status I&M board, by having this monthly, semi-annual, and annual for the inspectable unit for the engine, it will have status and notifications on where we're at with completion of the monthly maintenance and give color indications on that completeness. We also have the ability here to add, it's my training database is not going to let me do it. Normally on the frequency, it would have monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, annual that you could drop down on what frequency you would like the inspection to occur. And the inspectable unit, you could then select the storage tank associated to the generator to then queue up the tanks checklist as part of the facility power module and the 487 monthly maintenance. So to add the tank's checklist, you would then add the checklist to the generator and the equipment here on the inspections tab. Any questions about equipment so far? I will take silence as golden. I just remembered I was going to show you about management groups. So under the setup, so if you've associated a management group to the piece of equipment, you also need to associate the management group to the various engine technicians. So under the setup dropdown in the power module, there's also a setup drop-down menu. In the air quality side of APIMS, they'll both come to the same part of APIMS. You have management groups. So by clicking on management groups, it will list the management groups that already exist in the APIMS database. Like I mentioned before, Age, HVAC, and Power Pro are stock management groups in the database already, but you have the ability to create management groups as you see fit. So if we wanted to add a med group management group for our medical facilities, we could hit save on our med group, and then APIMS is going to list all of the users that have access to the APIMS database for this particular installation. And you can then just go down the right-hand side and select the usernames that you want to associate then to this management group. Once you've selected all of the names in the list that you want to add, hit the save button, and those users are now associated with this management group. You always have the ability, if the technicians switch roles and went from a contractor with the med group to the Power Pro shop, you can always click and unassign and hit the save button and remove them from that particular user group and add them to another one. So it's not a lifelong designation. You can change over time based off of the user community at your installation. So now going back to the equipment dropdown, the next piece of the module is add new. So if a new generator or engine is coming on the base, users in the facility power module have the ability to enter in that information in the facility power module. However, I want to point out that while these banners are the same ones we saw with the equipment, there are a couple that show up that don't appear regularly on the facility power module, and it has to do with compliance with air regulations. So the regulatory information, calculation methodologies, the control and stack, those are necessary for environmental, to do modeling, to know permit structure, to know which parts of the Clean Air Act are applicable to this generator. Since those are environmental questions, if it were an engine user or engine admin coming in to create the piece of equipment, those banners won't even appear on their account when they're entering the information. The engine user role has a submit button. However, the engine admin does have the approve button. And even though they're not filling out these regulatory fields, they can approve, and APIMS will just give blanket stock answers to those compliance records. So when new equipment is being created, it's always good to make sure that there's communication between the ops side and environmental, so that if we do need to configure any of this information for air quality reasons, we have the ability to do that. It's not once the engine admin hits the approve button, it's lost and forever locked with whatever stock answers are put in there. You can, on the air quality side of APIMS, go to equipment and add the necessary compliance information. But just note that it's possible for the technicians to get the equipment into the module but not have correct compliance information. But as we saw on the piece of equipment that was fully configured, these tabs, you click on them, and it will tell you on the right-hand side how much information is required for this particular record. Once you type in all of the red asterisk fields, the banners turn green to let you know that it's configured enough to save the record. This is the one module for APIMS that you can do only partial entry and still save your work and come back to it later. Most every other piece of APIMS, it's the all or nothing. However, there's enough details and points of data for this module that they did give us a break and have this saved. So if you're entering a generator yourself and you just don't have all of the necessary data at your fingertips, you can enter what you do have, or more likely you get called to that hot meeting or the spill or something else that takes your attention away from creating this equipment. You can hit the save button, and then at that home screen, a task will appear that a new piece of equipment is partially configured and needs your attention to complete. The last piece of the equipment drop down is parts. This is a high level view of different pieces and parts in the shop. Basically, it's an accounting of what materials they have on hand necessary to complete engine maintenance. This is not a required piece of APIMS. It just makes it a little more robust so that the engine community, engine technicians can list what parts they do have on hand, the number, so that at a moment they can come in and take a look and see if they need to reorder any parts or if they're ready to do their annual maintenance on the generator. It has a downfall right now that on this parts inventory, it is not capable of utilizing the management groups. So all users can come in here and log their parts. However, the med group would not be able to tell if it's the Red Horse equipment or Power Pro or whose parts and pieces are logged in this parts module. They would just be able to see, hey, we have this many oil filters, which can cause to confusion and finger blaming as far as not having this up to date. So can be useful, but it does have a little shortcoming without having the management groups associated to it. Any questions about management groups or equipment? Excellent. Well, at this point, we're going to get into the real meat and potatoes of the facility power module, which is completing 487s. So with that, I will then go to the I&M records dropdown and status board. On the status board, as I mentioned, with those inspections dates for the unit or the engine, on the far right-hand side, we then get the status and alerts. So for this particular month, the status board always starts on the month year that we're in. It's showing that our status for the monthly maintenance on these generators is 0 of 3, or we haven't started any records for this particular month for any of these generators. It also then uses those dates to give alerts to let the users know that, hey, in February of 2024, your semi-annual will be due, to help them make sure they have the right personnel as well as parts to conduct that semi-annual. Also, if they need to coordinate with any of the facility managers for those particular maintenance events, they can make sure that they're scheduling and having those lined up. But otherwise, on the left, we have the icons like we saw on the equipment. There are a couple of new icons, however. In this case, we have the wrench. In this case, it's the edit equipment. When we're on the equipment inventory, that pencil and paper would edit the equipment. In this case, since it's the status board, the edit view is to edit view an active 487 record, whereas the wrench will take you into the equipment record to adjust or change any of the data there. We also have the arrow going into a box. It's the import button. So that is when the technicians, if they choose to use the fillable PDF and have that saved, they can then click the import button and upload the completed 487 form. Otherwise, we have the filters across the top like we had on the equipment, in which they can type and hone in and find the piece of equipment they're looking for. So right now I will show an example of the upload. So on my training folder, I have an Air Force Form 487 that I have gone through and fully completed with the check boxes and the runtime readings. So I'm going to use this form and upload in the system. So I'm going to click that import button. I'm going to go browse out through my file structure to get that PDF. Do note that when filling out the PDF fillable form, the dates need to be in the format of year, month, date. That's the format, if you're familiar with APIMS, that is most commonly used throughout APIMS. So they're enforcing that format for dates. So if you have any other date format on the fillable PDF, the upload will fail and you'll get a notice saying that it can't upload. So little heads up there. But I will browse out. Sorry, I normally have that one queued up, but I will then grab my PDF that was completed and hit the import button. As I mentioned, it's going to then mine all of the information and it's going to then populate into the module. By using that upload function, APIMS stops on the very first tab or page of the 487 because of this question right here. It's a required question for the 487 electronically in APIMS. However, it is not a historic question that was ever asked on the 487 form. So it's asking, is the non-resettable hour meter still installed and functioning? So in the Clean Air Act, the definition of an emergency generator, which most all our generators are classified as emergency, to be emergency in the definition, it has to have an installed functional non-resettable hour meter. So to make sure that we're still meeting that part of the definition of an emergency generator, we're asking the technicians when they're doing the inspection to answer that question. So ideally, it's still functioning. They can mark yes and hit save. The tabs for the rest of the 487 open up. And since it mined the information, they're already completed, and we can just skip all the way to the very end and hit the comments and approval. I won't do the comments and approval yet. I'm going to do a full upload or creation of a 487 through the front end of the module. But if you do use the PDF, it is that streamline of uploading the information. However, I don't know if anyone was paying close attention. The PDF of the 487 that I used was for record R5. However, when I uploaded the PDF, I uploaded it against the unit R2. Unfortunately, this is a pitfall that APIMS does not do a quality check on what 487 equipment you're uploading that record for. So it, like you just saw right now, it's very easy to machine speed upload incorrect data. And if you don't then notice that it was incorrect data, approve it and move forward. And now we have bad record keeping in the APIMS database. So if you can see up at the top, it does name the PDFs based off of the unit ID. So it's just making sure that our technicians or user community is aware of that and let them know that take a deep breath before they upload. Make sure that they're uploading the correct PDF to the correct engine so that we don't cross streams and muck up the database. But otherwise, I'm going to go back to the INM status board and I'll walk through completion of a 487 going through the front end of the module. So I'm going to use unit R5. I'm going to go ahead and hit that plus button to add an INM inspection event. And the first thing it's going to ask is what month and year are we doing this inspection for? So if you're familiar with 487s, you'll know on the back on block 17, it has the language that this document must be closed out at 0-100 daily. So the paper form is indicating that it is a daily record. Anytime the technician is going to the generator and making an entry, they're supposed to have a new 487 form. However, electronically, it's going to be one record for the entire month. Anytime a technician is coming to the generator to record any maintenance event, they're going to come into the same monthly record and just amend and add those inspection pieces to the record. APIMS does take care of that daily record by if multiple days entries are entered into the electronic 487, if you hit the PDF button to view that month's PDF, it will render multiple days of 487 forms to meet that daily requirement. But for us, we'll do a September 2023 maintenance event. So once I put in the date, I'll hit the continue button. If you don't remember the format for this date, you also have the ability to hit the calendar and then select the month from that calendar, and APIMS will stub in the date for us. Hitting continue, it opens up further fields of the 487 form. On the 487 form, as we make selections in the database, APIMS will add or subtract fields according to the selections we make. So I'll jump ahead, and when we go down to the unit started, if we tell the system that the unit did not start, it's not going to ask us any further question. It's smart enough to know that the engine didn't start. Therefore, I don't need to ask questions on did you load bank it because it didn't even start. So throughout the database, those selections will add or subtract the questions according to how we're telling the maintenance event occurred. But going back to the top, we're going to enter in the inspector or operator that's doing the maintenance. They have the dropdown that will show a list of the names of technicians that are in the facility power module. So ideally, they can find their name as the engine technician and select it from the dropdown list. However, there's instances where someone else will be entering the monthly record for that technician, or that technician's just not in the system yet. So there's the ability to select the inspector name not in list and then hand type the name of the inspector. Next is the inspection type. Since there are the different preventative maintenance requirements in UFC 3-540-07, and the engine technicians need to make sure that they're doing those various interval inspections. They're listed here. The one thing to note and stress that if they're doing one of the higher level maintenance events, so on the annual is when they do the full oil change and large maintenance events for the generator. By doing the annual, they're also conducting a monthly and a semi-monthly. So it's best practice to get the credit and let the module know that all of those are occurring, is select all the inspection types that apply. But next up is the start hours. So the technician, when they get to the engine before even starting it up, will take a look at the hour meter reading and enter in the hours on the hour meter. APIMS will list the previous hour meter. So the last time a 487 record was entered, that end hour meter will be listed and what month, year that record or time came from. So that, like in this case, it's been several years since we last did maintenance on this. There was some activity on the generator. While it might not have been recorded, we can now take account of it at this point. So it gives the technician the heads up of possibly month to month in those intervals from when they were at the generator, there was an emergency outage, and they're able to capture those hours. Then as the technician, they can select if they have the site documentations that they're required to have on site for them. And then going into the questions of unit started. So if you are in the position where you have contractor maintained engines and that contractor has never used a 487. They're contractually not obligated to use a 487. So you're not going to be able to get that information from them, but the pebble of pain of entering in the maintenance records falls onto your lap in environmental. To answer the questions on these first blocks that are more about the engine technician and how they operated it, I would just recommend using the first selection available. So for unit started, just assume that it started on the first attempt. Was the unit load tested? Yes. And then, like I said, just do the first selection down the list. Obviously, if you're in Power Pro or familiar with the 487 or the tenant, the contractor actually is filling this form out, they can select the appropriate accurate. But this information is mostly for the technicians and the ops world to understand the reliability of the generator. And for us in environmental, we want the records for the runtime and the type of operation, so we can just give APIMS stock information to make sure that we can enter the pertinent information for us. And then, of course, there's the non-resettable hour meter question. Also, at this point, note that APIMS has these alphanumeric prefixes to the fields. Those are a one-to-one to APIMS. So block 1I, the ATS operated on the first, second, third attempt. It's asking the automatic transfer switch worked on the first, second, or third attempt. So there is a one-to-one relationship. Other than this non-resettable hour meter, we're not asking engine technicians questions if they're familiar with 47, anything that they're not already familiar with answering. But once we have those fields populated, we can hit save. And like we saw with that upload, it then opens up the tabs for all the various other pieces of the 487. So when I was showing you the inventory and talked about the alternator not having the phase, so when you're on the runtime reading, if a technician is in this experience, it's that pitfall of the phase not being entered. But when they're on the runtime readings, by clicking the add, they can take their runtime reading, which requires them to take a reading of the amps and volts. So as they're entering in the amps and volt reading, APIMS should automatically calculate the kilowatt rating of the generator. If, in the case, the kilowatts is not being calculated as the amps and volts are being entered, that's that situation where the phase has not been selected, so APIMS does not know which calculation to use to calculate the kilowatts. So just as something to keep in your back pocket, that is a common occurrence that I get phone calls about of APIMS is broken. It's not calculating kilowatts. It's just because APIMS is giving us a false sense of the piece of equipment is fully configured. But next up, as I've been talking about the Clean Air Act and the incorporation in OABGD and FGS, not only are oil changes required, but under the Clean Air Act, we need to inspect hoses and belts annually or every 500 or 1,000 hours of operation, whichever comes first. So like the oil change, we need to have records that we've inspected hoses and belts annually. Well, by entering in 487s, we are already getting that answered for us. So on the general site and generator conditions, question 5E, is the belt condition acceptable? By having our engine technicians fill in the full 487, and in particular this question, we're getting that compliance record that yes, we did do a belt inspection. Similarly, when we go to the cooling systems tab, question 6C, are the cooling system hoses satisfactory? By them answering that question, we're getting that we did a hose inspection. So those two tabs and those two questions are adding to our arsenal of the compliance documentation that we need to show compliance. Since Most of the rest of the tabs are not pertinent to environmental. They're an ops side. I'm not going to dwell on them. Most all of them are just these yes, no, satisfactory or not type questions. And if we had those questions, it's worthwhile to fill in, but not a requirement. Next, I'm going to talk about maintenance actions. This is where the oil change can be documented. So down here on block 12C, we have the oil change, yes, no. And as I mentioned with that oil analysis log, you have the ability to select if an analysis was done. And if you notice, the oil analysis field drops in right here, and you can then select the oil analysis results that were loaded in the oil analysis log. The other thing to note, as I mentioned, the 719 automatically gets filled in with the completion of a 487. It's worth noting that this other maintenance field will verbatim be copied onto the 719. So at a bare minimum, by entering a 487 in the APIMS database, we'll just stub in a line on the 719 saying that on this month, this date, the generator was operated for monthly maintenance. It will then also bring in if the oil was changed, battery changed, etc. And then, as I mentioned, anything that gets typed in this other maintenance field will verbatim be copied onto the 719. So if there's any large, out of the ordinary maintenance occurring, we changed the fuel injector, etc., it's worth to add that information here so that it's also on the 719. When we were on that inspections, I mentioned for the equipment, I mentioned that we can associate the tanks checklist. So if we have associated the tanks checklists on this checklist tab of the 719, it would have a row in the table here for the tanks checklist and an action icon with a pencil and paper for them to edit view. The technicians can then click that pencil and paper and will automatically take them into the STAR module where they can then answer the tanks checklist questions, save that record, which will then obviously give the STAR module the check mark that the tanks checklist was completed in the STAR module, and we can meet that STAR requirement of having our monthly tanks checklists completed. Once the checklist is completed, they'll end up right back here in the facility power module, and we can then go to the comments and approval. On the comments and approval, we have a PDF icon to view. You can click that and download it, which will then show all of the fields that have been completed up to this point so that you can do a quick review of the 487 and see all of the entries that were made. So you don't have to click back through each individual tab to do a quick review. You can see the completed form right here. Otherwise, I'm going to enter in my end hour meter. And as we noticed that when I put in the start hour meter, there was a jump from the last time we had an entry. So APIMS is going to ask us right here that since we last recorded an end hour meter, this unit has run 10.8 hours. How do we want to account for those run times? So as we saw, not all hours are created equal. So we need to then say how we want to account for that 10.8 hours, whether it was all maintenance and testing or a combination of multiple operation types. If it were just maintenance and testing, it's going to take the full 10 hours and align it to maintenance and testing. If we select more than one, boxes will appear under those operation types where the technician can then enter the allocation of those hours. The APIMS will require the allocation to be exactly the hours that occurred. You can't over allocate or under allocate and approve or finalize the 487. We have to fully account for those hours. When we select emergency, APIMS is going to ask further questions about the nature of the emergency. It's just a drop-down list on whether it was a base outage, a facility outage, a scheduled outage, or a feeder. We can select what's applicable, and then the last question of was it a scheduled outage selected. Similarly, for the difference of the start hour meter and the end hour meter for this particular month, APIMS is going to take the difference between this finished hour and the start hour we entered on the very first tab. And we can either select just the one operation type or all that apply. And then we need to allocate those hours according to how it was operated. But once all of those have been filled in for the end hour meter and the allocation of the type of operation, depending on the role of the user, if they are an engine admin, they have the approve button where they can then go through the approve process. Or if they're an engine user, they have the submit for approval, where it's going to then set up a task on that home screen for an engine admin role to pick up and do the approval process. I'll go ahead and follow the engine admin role and go to the approval. So approval also has the view where they can see the completed PDF of the 47 that was entered, so that they can just quickly go through on the what would be a paper looking form of the completed 487 to ensure the data is correct. Once the data is correct and they're ready to approve it, they can select their name from the drop down list and then put in the approval date. There is the capability, like with the inspector, that the approver is not in the list. However, in this case, if the approver is not on the list, we need to hand type in the name of the user, as well as upload the scanned copy of the completed form with the wet signature of the person who's approving it. But since in this training database, I'm user 10, I'm going to go ahead and select user 10, and I will approve the 487 today. Click the approve button. It saves all of the data and locks all of the fields, so you can go through all the various tabs of the 47, but they're now read-only. So this data cannot be changed and cause a fracture or disconnect in our record keeping. They're all read-only. If you scroll down to the bottom on this page, you do have the unlock button. So if you are an engine admin role and you've approved it and you realize, oops, I totally skipped out and missed something that we need to address, it can be unlocked, make the changes, go back through the approval process to make the necessary corrections. But by having the 487 approved and completed, the runtime records for these various operation types and hours automatically get moved over to the air quality side of APIMS into the IC engine log. So I'm going to go ahead and on the homes drop down, go to air and show you those usage records over in the facility from the facility power module. So on the air home side, on the usage drop down, I will go to the IC engine log. And in this circumstance, I entered in the records for unit R5. I'm going to go ahead and hit search. Since the latest view runs was clicked for yes, it's only showing the most recent maintenance and emergency, but we can see that for September, we had our emergency run of 190 hours and our maintenance event of 2.8 hours. If we were to hit the edit view on either one of these usage records, when you come in, it's got this gray notice letting us know that this record was generated by the facility power module. As we talked about earlier, we never historically took account to the load of the generator, that oftentimes we're not fully loading our generator, therefore the engine's not working as hard and we're not putting out as much emissions. By utilizing the facility power module, we're going to better take account for the load the generator is put under and start prorating our air emissions based off of the load of the generator. So we have that up as a banner. APIMS will also calculate out an estimate on the fuel used based off of the runtime hours on a full tank associated to the equipment. So we'll have records of the total hours as well as the approximate fuel used. Are there any questions regarding entering 487 or that information then coming over to the air quality side thing the IC engine log. Well, I will take silence as golden. I'm going to jump back into production just to show you a couple of last things on the facility power module. So in production, if I go into power home, so I'm in the facility power module, on the reports drop down, there's custom, which will go into business objects where you can pull up reports that were already configured for you or create your own report that's pulling information from APIMS database. But here we have the facility power utilization. So every month on the 15th, this report is being pulled and then disseminated to leadership on the compliance with the SAF IE memo. So if you click on the facility power utilization, it will automatically open up APIMS and the utilization report. So if ever you or your shop wants to pull this report to see how well you're doing with compliance with the SAF IE memo, you can pull this report yourself. So this one's kind of a sad look on Aldafra. We're in the middle of working with them to get them fully configured, so they haven't started entering their records. But the one I want to point out is this base details sheet of the report. It lists all of the equipment that is being pulled into this report on the first columns, and if you scroll all the way to the right, it will list off the 12 months. And so that SAF IE memo is looking at a rolling 12-month period on completing 487s. Since Aldafra is in the midst of being implemented, their months aren't showing up yet, but there'll be a column for each of the 12 months and have a check mark and show the percentage for each of the pieces of equipment. So we can use this to troubleshoot maybe equipment is flagged with the incorrect equipment type. So right now the SAF IE memo is only looking at stationary generators. So our portable generators, as well as fire pumps, should not be included in here. And so it's possible that we have the wrong equipment type associated to a fire pump and it's incorrectly being pulled into the report. So we can use this to troubleshoot that, as well as just get an updated view on how we're doing with complying with the SAF IE memo. The other thing to note about the metrics, when they pull the report on the 15th, they don't back update previous months. So if you and your shop have entered in historic 487 records during August for the past year, when they pull the report for September, it will not show that January, February, March, and those previous months were updated and now at 100%. All that they do on the 15th is pull the new months and amend it to the existing report that was pulled the previous months. So it's caused a lot of difficulties as far as leadership gets briefed on, hey, you're still only at 13%, because their report doesn't update the past months of historic records that might have been inputted. So it's nice to know that this report is there, that you can pull it and keep in your back pocket to show like, hey, the memo or the report that you were briefed on only showed updated for this current month, but look, we've actually done our due diligence, entered historic information, and we're now looking at 98% or better, 100%. So it's good to have this report in your back pocket. The other things, as I was alluding to earlier, if you go to the silhouette of the person in the upper right, we have the suggestions. So it's not just for the facility power module, it's for any piece of the APIMS database. If there's a improvement or something that's hindering your ability to do your job because of the way APIMS is configured, you can add a suggestion to make the change. Like any great social media platform, you can search on the description to find maybe someone else who already suggested a change that you want to have yourself, in which case you can use the star ranking on the right and upvote it to get it higher on visibility and get the possible change. But to leave the caveat that just because you put in a suggestion does not mean it's automatically going to get a fix. And even if you have the suggestion in there and you have thousands of 5-star votes for it, it does come down to how easy is it to code, how much funding we have to make changes in the APIMS database, as well as what's the security risk on making that change. Obviously, if there's big security risks in other pieces of the module, those are going to get the funding before we take care of just changing that button to a prettier blue, because it's easier on the eyes. So not a guarantee, but unless the folks who maintain APIMS database know it's a hindrance or a problem, it's never going to get changed. So please feel free to add suggestions and improves and see if folks have made similar suggestions. Another thing I want to point out on the silhouette of the person here is the help guides. So if you click on help guides, there are numerous documents here in APIMS to help you unstick for various modules. But since we just talked about the facility power module, if you click the header of document table, it puts it in alphabetical order. There's the facility power module guide. So this is a whole bunch of screenshots of the facility power module with text bubbles that describe each of the various pages of the facility power module that help you understand what data needs to go in the fields and how to utilize the module. There's also the training video index, which is a PDF with hyperlinks to YouTube and MilTube videos. There's videos for most all of the modules in APIMS, including the facility power module. So you can click on the link for the YouTube or MilTube videos for the facility power module. And it's very much like we just had this last hour and a half of someone talking through the various screens of the facility power module and entering in a 487 maintenance record. So you can download that, fast forward and rewind to the sections and hear and see someone entering in records. And then the last piece of support is here at the top, and on most screens throughout APIMS, you have the help desk phone number and email address. So it's a great bunch of folks, super knowledgeable and helpful. They are also very quick on getting responses to you. So if you are stuck or have questions about how to navigate through the facility power module or any other piece of the APIMS database, you have them as a resource to get yourself going again. So there's lots of layers. So hopefully you don't feel like you are stuck all alone and needing to figure all of this out by yourself. There are material and reports out there and support to make sure that you're successful and as streamlined as possible using the APIMS database. With that, that concludes everything I was going to present this morning. There's still a little bit of time if there's any questions, but otherwise, this concludes the training, and I appreciate everyone's time and attentiveness.